are not really aware of. I don't think that the Europeans are aware of the boldness of their enterprise. And not surprisingly, the other continents, all the observers looking at us know that this is very, very bold. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of them were trusting that in the worst crisis ever in the advanced economy since World War II, perhaps the worst since World War I, of course, the euro area will evaporate, will disappear. Of course, the European endeavor will appear to be much too bold. Taking into account the boldness of the endeavor, it's not surprising that there was such a sentiment. In Europe, it seems to me that the determination to continue and deepen the historical endeavor is such that, again, we don't see the boldness. And the fact is that we had a stress test. We had the worst crisis ever since World War II, and the European Union hold until now, and the euro area hold until now. Not only the euro area hold, but I mentioned that en passant. We were 15 when Lehman Brothers had the bankruptcy episode. We are 18 at the moment I'm speaking, and we all know that we would be 19 sovereign countries, member of the euro area, next January. So it's the proof, in a way, that our own determination is certainly much more important than what was suspected from abroad. But to, I would say, in the worst crisis ever since World War II, ensure our very existence is something which is not negligible. I insist myself on this achievement, but it doesn't suffice. What is needed in the medium and long term is that we deliver growth and jobs. And I would say perhaps in that order, jobs and the fight against mass unemployment and growth. And that is the right criteria to measure our success in the long run. And that's the reason why there are so, I would say, profound merit in what is done, in my view, by Bruegel and by the Bruegel scholars in order to be sure that we put all the chances on our side. Mr. Minister, again, thank you so much for having accepted this invitation. You're a very young minister, it's visible, and you're full of energy. You have a PhD of the University of Sussex, graduated from the University of Warsaw, and you have been chief economist of several banks, international and national. And you have also a lot of, I would say, a multi-ocular vision of the world and of Europe, because you are both in London, you were both in London, in Poland, and in the rest of the world. So again, we thank you very much, and I give you the floor immediately, without further ado.
Jean-Claude, Guntram, thank you very much for the invitation. Honourable members of the European Parliament, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The Bruegel Institute is one of the most influential European think tanks, and it's the quality of its research that it's making it translate into the actual policy making. Which is why I'm even more, I treat this as an honor and a great privilege to be able to address this exceptional audience tonight. Thank you very much. We are meeting here at the time when Europe is facing a great threat. It is not the danger of a sovereign debt crisis. It's not a danger of a collapse of the Eurozone. We have managed to decisively avert those threats through a coordinated effort. at the European level. Unfortunately, I'm also not talking about a risk of a lost decade, because the lost decade is already a baseline scenario. It's 7 or 6 years, depending how you count, since the start of the financial crisis, and the European GDP is still below pre-crisis levels. It's around 10% below the level consistent with trend growth ahead of the crisis. So as a continent, we're doing worse than Japan in the 1980s, and we're doing worse than during the Great Depression of the 1930s. So it's already quite a bad situation. Now, the timid recovery, which was giving us so much hope earlier this year, has recently stalled. Unemployment and the output gap are close to record highs, and we're on the verge of deflation. Some of our countries are beyond this verge already. And even Poland, with its continuing economic expansion, it also faces elevated unemployment and below potential growth. So you may ask, what kind of risk, what kind of threat I'm talking about? What else could be added to this quite a bad baseline? Well, it's a threat of a secular stagnation, the trap of permanently depressed demand, meager long-term structural growth rates. It is a threat of a lost generation, not a lost decade, lost generation. So a generation of young people who will never find their way into a quality employment, will never fulfill their human and economic potential, and to realize that such a gloomy outlook, such a gloomy scenario may already be unfolding, is just enough to look at the labor market today. Almost a quarter of all young people in Europe have no jobs, and persistent unemployment, inequality and debt burden, which is increasing with each month of stagnant income and near deflation, that threatens not only European economic outlook and economic development, but it risks unraveling the entire social structure of the European Union. The radical parties are gaining strength, and as Europeans and as Poles in particular, we always have to remember that it's depression and deflation that brought to power the totalitarian regime and devastated the continent through the World War and atrocities 75 years ago. Now, Europe is not doomed. It cannot be otherwise. My boss wouldn't be changing his jobs. But we do need a concerted and decisive actions, both at national and international levels, to close the output gap, create jobs, strengthen the long-term growth potential, and all the while ensuring the sustainability of public finances. Such actions, many of which have already been undertaken, span a wide spectrum of policies, reforms, regulatory changes. So much attention has already been given to three broad areas: structural reform, European monetary policy, and national fiscal policy. So let me take these three in turns. I mean, structural reforms are necessary and essential to promote flexibility and increase long-term growth. We do need labor market reforms. We have to cut red tape. We must reduce the regulatory burden. Completing the single market is key to ensuring efficient allocation of resources. And meanwhile, the European Banking Union should supplement these reforms to promote financial stability. Now, the crisis, despite its obvious costs, does offer tremendous opportunity to overhaul the ailing aspects of the European economies. It can be a catalyst for a positive change. Now, the challenge looming on the horizon is deflation. This threat makes traditional monetary policy instruments inadequate or irrelevant. Reviving recovery and reaching inflation target therefore requires continued monetary expansion through unconventional measures, and the recent well, today is cut by the ECB, and the announcement of special operations in the near future is a source of optimism. However, this optimism has to be qualified by the relative impotence of monetary policy while we're close to the zero bound. The situation when interest rates are already close to zero or beyond zero and cannot be reduced any further. And the third area, the new European fiscal framework, this already is the foundation of public finance sustainability. But together with the ECB's resolve, it has already restored confidence and averted the debt crisis. And this is a great achievement. But to provide more growth momentum, we need smarter national fiscal policies within the constraints of the Stability and Growth Pact. And I underline here the importance of the SGP as they represent necessary restraint and provide trust in the economic policy in Europe. You might have heard all this before. Ladies and gentlemen, while progress on these three fronts, structural reform, monetary policy and public finance stability, it's all necessary and essential. It's time to face the fact that it will not be sufficient. It will not be sufficient to overcome the fundamental problem holding back the European economy, and that is depressed investment demand. The economic crisis caused a historically unprecedented collapse in capital investments in the European Union. 6 years after the beginning of the financial crisis, private investments fall 1/5 below pre-crisis levels, and investments in Europe is low at the time when it is needed more than ever. Higher capital expenditures could be a powerful way to boost competitiveness, to boost economic recovery, and close the output gap in the short term, but at the same time they would help to boost growth potential in the long run. And investment multipliers are particularly high in deep recessions and slow growth area. This is especially true during the balance sheet recessions when private sector is in the process of deleveraging, which is the case right now, not only in Europe. While the interest rates are constrained at the zero lower bound, unable to balance savings and investments. A greater investment should also help to achieve the vision of Europe 2020, the vision of which all member states agreed and we, at least most of us, share. And those who fear that secular stagnation, this bad scenario, is already with us, point to a particularly worrying combination, and that is an investment shortfall coinciding with historically low interest rates. Cheap and plentiful savings are not being translated, not being transformed into productive capital for three reasons. First, the private sector lacks confidence in future demand for its products. Second, real interest rates cannot turn negative due to deflationary environment. And third, in most EU member states, public sector lacks fiscal space to scale up investments operations. So while at the same time necessary structural reforms, first of all, they take time to bring fruit, and secondly, they often have a very indirect impact on the crucial saving-investment balance. So I believe that to overcome these constraints, we need a decisive public investment initiative at the European level. I propose that we take advantage of the favorable market environment right now in order to undertake strategic public investment projects across Europe and in line with the rules underpinning Stability and Growth Pact. It will aid our growth in the long term, while at the same time help us escape the current economic weakness and avert the danger of generation-long stagnation. We estimate that using conservative assumptions about the size of the current output gap and fiscal multipliers, that closing the output gap in the medium term requires phased-in European public investment spending of around 5.5% of European Union GDP. That is about 700 billion euros. Now, the capital spending would start at 0.5% of European GDP in 2015, peak at 2% in 2017, and be gradually phased out afterwards. The path is proposed as a large-scale public investment projects. They take time to get started. It also gives policymakers time to react and adjust the size of the initiative if economic conditions change during the coming years. Hopefully they will change for better faster. The proposed initiative should ensure that infrastructure critical to long-term growth of Europe is put in place, in line with estimates given by the European Commission. The additional resources should supplement, not replace, European Investment Bank financing and multiple functions of the EU budget. So it's a new project, not something that we carve out of the current instruments. So how to mobilize such investments? We propose to establish the European Fund for Investments. As I worked in financial sector a year ago, I remember how terrible it is to pronounce EFSF several times a day. It's even more difficult than my last name. So the trick is to make sure that the acronym is right. So this EFI will preferably operate as a special purpose vehicle under the umbrella of the European Investment Bank Group. The capital of the fund will be leveraged by borrowing in the financial market and directly invested in the selected infrastructure projects because Europe needs actual investment expenditure, not merely extra funding. Funding is free for some countries in Europe, and we still don't have investments. So even Poland and Germany, investment credit in these countries remains quite subdued. Direct public sector participation would bring in private investors who are currently chasing quite a small number of bankable projects because they tend to consider large-scale infrastructure projects too risky in terms of future demand, regulatory environment, and profitability. The assets created through these instruments would eventually be privatized, generating revenues for the fund. However, the logic of the excess savings at the zero lower bound, the experience with previous instances of balance sheet recessions, they should make us prepared for prolonged ownership of newly created assets. Japanese crisis or stagnation has lasted for a number of decades. In the US, following the Great Crisis, the interest rates normalized after a generation, essentially, after the Korean War. They came back to the pre-crisis levels. The fund's size, its direct investment in infrastructure and long-term investing horizon will be the key difference from the current instruments that we already have. The European Investment Fund, which has only 4.5 billion euros after the recent change, and it facilitates SMEs access to finance through intermediary funds. This would be different. Now, to start operating the new vehicle would require a gradual injection of paid-in capital and guarantees by all EU member states in a similar way and on a similar scale as was done for the European Stability Mechanism. This should be necessary to ensure the AAA rating. And the contributions of member states to the capitalization of the fund would be excluded from the calculation of the budget deficits, and borrowing on financial markets will be recorded as EFI debt and not rerouted to the member states. And this treatment will be exactly the same as it is the case under the ESM and with the rules underpinning the Stability and Growth Pacts. And it's important that all EU member states take part in this initiative to prevent free riding because it would benefit the whole European Union. Now, the fund would facilitate directing currently idle private savings towards large-scale pan-European infrastructure projects with particular focus on energy, transportation, and ICT, possibly also European defense. These sectors have all long been defined as priority areas for long-term sustainable growth in Europe. And the principle of subsidiarity justifies taking the action at the European level. These investment projects would contribute to energy interconnectedness, independence and security, also known as the Energy Union, reduction of carbon emissions, promotion of trade, investment and mobility among member states. It would help to shift Europe towards digital union and knowledge-based growth model. Now, at the same time, investment projects in the most depressed economies, as measured by output gaps or product gaps, should be prioritized through front-loading. The fund must not become another income redistribution tool. It must not become another EU budget with all the discussions related to it. It should not promote economic laggards whose inadequate growth is a result of the structural weakness and wrong policies. Instead, it will be a mechanism for synchronizing the business cycle. It will combat intra-European imbalances and reduce the pressure on labor migrations and on macroprudential regulation. So, what is more, let's think about this, this will actually promote structural reform. So, the more you increase your potential growth with demand remaining unchanged, the more money you'll be getting from this instrument. Many of you might be asking already, can Europe afford such an additional financial burden at the current junction? The question is whether can we afford not to take it on? Now, before you answer this question, consider the present market conditions, consider the historically low interest rates, consider the potentially large multipliers generated by investment spending in a depressed economy. Consider the stimulus to demand, the uptick in long-term growth rates, and consider the additional publicly owned capital stock, which is a side bonus, I suppose. Consider the evidence that public investment could actually reduce debt burden in the medium term. It could strengthen the fiscal sustainability. And consider the alternative, the risk of secular stagnation, which may already be with us today. Do we really have a choice? Ladies and gentlemen, Europe's road to recovery requires us to show determination in reaching our goals and courage in making difficult decisions. We've already made many of these steps, and it showed that despite our sometimes divergent views, member states can find mutually beneficial solutions to our shared problems. And the future of the European Union depends on our determination today. It still depends on it. And we should be able to implement the ambitious agenda of reforms and have a capacity to adjust to new challenges. Right now, boosting European investment is, in my view, the most important but perfectly achievable economic challenge of Europe. I mean, this evening I've outlined the effective and fiscally responsible economic and institutional answer to this challenge. I'm looking forward to working with our European colleagues and Bruegel in particular to develop it in full details and implement it as quickly as possible, because the time is running out. The lack of demand, investment demand, does create its lack of supply, as Bara Hegrini was saying, and its insufficient growth is killing our growth potential. In conclusion, let me make just one thing absolutely clear. I'm very, very proud and happy that Poland was the only country in Europe that never stopped growing throughout the crisis. But we cannot be complacent. As Europeans, we can sustainably meet our growth aspirations only within strong and growing Europe. So the responsibility for ending the lost decade and avoiding the lost generation is on all EU member states. I can confirm therefore, without any hesitation, I would like to see Poland as the founding member of the new fund. And I'm counting on your support and cooperation and a good discussion tonight after the main course. Thank you very much. whatever reasons. Well, the treaty, it's a reason good enough. And because of political reasons and social reasons, very often the first victim of that is public investments. And it is a suboptimal situation. Suboptimal for two reasons. First of all, the structure of national budgets is wrong, but you won't change that easily by even by European semester. But at the same time, actual funding is not a problem at all. So it is a way of essentially taking this decision out of national governments, because there is a funding space available for that. I agree that it will be a challenge to get the projects right. You don't want to intrude on the area where national governments should have they have the domain. But there is a plentiful investment opportunities that span the whole European Union. And subsidiarity principle does allow and should allow for public investments. And there's no better time to do it than now. I mean, some things we have to do, and waiting yet another year is a crime in this environment. And what is more, as we've been discussing on the table, the risk of getting the investment wrong, well, it will not be sufficiently productivity enhancing and long-term growth enhancing. This risk is as small as it gets in the current market environment, because even if it's not productivity enhancing, even if you're organizing Euro 2012 and building some stadiums, then at least what you're doing, well, you're saving some of the young people from long-term unemployment and from becoming unemployable, and that's productivity enhancing as well. So in a sense, there won't be a better time for this kind of initiative, and the national governments will not do it, as we see, because even those who can have a fiscal space are unwilling to do so. Look, Germany, and those who can afford it from the point of view of getting access to funding are constrained by the Stability and Growth Pact.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't ask for a response, but I will only note that some countries in Europe have the same level of unemployment for the normal people, if I may, and for the young people, and even for the unskilled youth. So I have a tendency to consider that if there is an immense difference between the rate of unemployment of, I would say, general people and the unskilled youth, it is of our own making, largely of our own making. And I would also note, of course, that it is very important not to waste money, because the legacy outstanding debt is terrible in Europe. So I'm sure that your idea is that this infrastructure possible, which have a difficulty to be financed, should be, in the long term, of course, extraordinarily effective in fostering more growth in Europe. But we have a question over there. Please, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm the ambassador of South Africa. Thank you very much, Minister, for a very eloquent, brilliant explanation of the Eurozone crisis. Minister, I have two questions for you. You spoke quite passionately about the need for structural reforms to be instituted as part and parcel of the process of reviving the Eurozone economies. I'm quite keen to hear your comment on a key element of the European nation state, which is at the foundation of the European nation state, particularly the social structure, which is at the very foundation, at the very core of the European state. If you were to effect reforms and transform that, don't you think that there would be a social upheaval? There would be serious consequences. The whole concept, the whole notion of the European nation state would unravel as a result of that. I'm quite keen on your comment on that. Secondly, would you say the European model or the Western model has failed? And is that a lesson for us coming from the developing world that we should heed, that we should look for an alternative model of development? Thank you.
First of all, one word of clarification. I was not talking about Eurozone woes only, and I'm talking about the whole European Union. Secondly, the social state model. I do believe that there is room for variations of that model across member states. And I think Germany is a good example because it spends, as percent of GDP, one of the highest amounts of money on social protection. But at the same time, it doesn't prevent them from growing. So there is a room for optimizing the social state without toppling it altogether. And this is why I was not really concentrating on structural reforms. That's something that is a continuing process of making regulations better, for streamlining, making life easier for business and taxpayers. This is something we need to be doing all the time. I was actually pointing out to an uncomfortable reality that in the liquidity trap, in a situation where you have zero interest rates and investments still are not enough to absorb all the savings available, things like improving productivity could have very perverse effects. Or at best, you could end up with just stronger euro and same problems throughout, and even deeper problems with deflation. So, which is why I spend most of my time talking about investment increase. And now coming back to the third part, has the Western model failed? Well, certainly not. I mean, we've been in a similar situation back in the 30s, and the answer to that was, the Magneto problem. It is something that I do have my worries that even if it's just demand problem that's behind the slowdown and stagnation, it will take many years nonetheless to resolve. And if it is a question of aging, slowing down productivity growth, well, be it. But it's still the only model that I can't think of a much better model in general. Yeah. But we do have a problem with insufficient demand and too low inflation and too low zero interest rates. Now, just one thing to refer to what Jean-Claude has been saying. Indeed, I mean the gap between unemployment, general unemployment level, and youth unemployment level, in actual steady-state unemployment, is very often a result of misguided policies, which is why there are, apart from selecting the right investment projects, the key element of getting this mechanism right is to make sure that we are able to actually estimate potential growth properly. Clearly, European Commission does that. There is a long debate about estimating output gaps and potential growth, and it is absolutely crucial because I don't believe that a country with 20% unemployment is at the potential. There is clearly something wrong about the estimate if it points to just that. But it is becoming even more important when we're talking about the instrument like this, because money will come after that. Right now, you can be saved from stability and growth pact restrictions if you're particularly depressed at the margin. But if we are to implement this mechanism, then whether or not you will be getting the extra investments will be a result of the estimate of the potential output, which is why it is a crucially important element of the whole setup. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed. And then you are back, of course, to your message on structural reforms and elevating the growth potential. I have two questions and maybe more. Please, you have the floor. Could you stand up so that you have the mic? The mic, please.
I'm Georg Zachmann at Bruegel, working on energy and climate issues. So I'm a bit interested in the micro dimension of it, because you mentioned ICT and electricity sector. And I was a bit wondering, ICT and electricity is both regulated businesses. It's typically private companies, and they are not falling under the Stability and Growth Pact, so they have no big issue potentially with the corresponding constraints. The reasons why they are not investing in the things that we might want to see, more European interconnection, is much more of a regulatory nature. We don't have the incentives for building cross-border networks, and that cannot easily be addressed by pouring European money on things. That's my opinion. What I would wonder a bit is also who would decide then on which networks to be built if it were the state, because the risk is that those sectors are rather complex. You have, if for example you build an electricity transmission line, you might replace or you might make unprofitable a certain power plant that was sitting in a constrained region. You might make unprofitable a storage unit, or you might make unprofitable somebody that invested in demand response. And then by just letting the risk that the state might come true, you might have huge crowd out effects of much more efficient private investments. So I see a big risk there. My suggestion would be to think a bit more maybe about energy efficiency measures. There is huge potential in terms of investments necessary there. And there I do see much less of crowd out effects possible than trying to essentially renationalize the electricity and the ICT sector through deciding on who gets the money and who not.
It is a very fair point, and as I mentioned, the two things, getting the potential growth right and getting the projects right is of utmost importance. These are the minor technical difficulties that will make or break the whole project. The reason why I mentioned the interconnectedness is that there are certain externalities that the private companies will never address in making these decisions, which is always usually the only reason why you might want to involve public money in the whole project, in the whole process. I mean, of course, the list that I mentioned was not exclusive, and there is anything that makes sense is welcome. At the same time, you know, there'll be two things that need to be addressed. First of all, the lack of investments in a macro scale, and potential externalities of actually doing it with public money. It is a fair point, as I mentioned, what you were saying, and it will have to be taken into account how you make and where you make these investments. It could very well be a part of the PPP system where a private company is, in a sense, subsidized for making an effort for cross-border interconnectedness, and then this crowding out effect would be minimized.
Thank you very, very much for this response. So I have two more questions. Please, sir, you have the floor. Yeah, you take the floor over there. That's better.
Thank you very much. My name is Kale Agassi from TÜSİAD, Turkish Business and Industry Association. Mr. Minister, very excellent analysis, really, and excellent diagnosis. as it is always the case, you know, we are all national economies around the world facing the problems and knowing to analyze them and implementing the tools of the solution. Very creative tables here tonight with different names. I am probably in the table there with the less unexpected name, hopefully, less imaginary name. It's called United States of Europe. So, well, Mr. Minister, it's a question about your experience, not only about your analysis, but also about your experience on the synchronization of the time of the economy and time of the politics. Most of the time around the table of the council, you are ministers, political authorities representing different time rhythms for your next elections. Even in the national economies, we have governments elected for 5 years, presidents elected for 5 years, 4 years, more or less having the diagnosis of the problems and knowing how to implement some of the policy tools, whether it's about monetary expansion or more Keynesian approaches or name it. However, with lots of difficulties. But at the European level, the problem becomes even more complicated. So let's assume that we have the great solution for Europe. How will it work in practice? What is your personal experience of going beyond this dichotomy between the time of the politics and time of the economy? Thank you.
Well, a very quick answer to this would be that a parliamentary term is 4 years. The cabinet term, actually my cabinet future might be over in a couple of weeks. And while Europe is eternal. I think the example of how the European budget operates, the example of the ESM shows that it is possible in times of great need to agree and implement controversial instruments that will be much longer lasting than any government. And the worrying second side of this argument is that I fear that the problem we're facing is not going to go away tomorrow. And it's not like we will be too late and business cycle will turn for better and things will be solved. We wouldn't be talking about this, at least I wouldn't be talking about this, if it were to be very likely. As I mentioned, once you get the private sector deleveraging, it could go on for many, many, many years, which is why this potential time inconsistency risk is also smaller. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. New questions are rising. I would echo what you just said on the fact that in exceptional circumstances, things that appear to be absolutely impossible, a new treaty, Olli Rehn knows that better than anybody, 2 new treaties were negotiated and signed in the time of the crisis, when immediately before the crisis, everybody would have said it's totally excluded, we will never have a new treaty. And we are badly in need of treaty changes today, even if a lot of people are saying, forget about it, it's impossible. I'm sorry, because perhaps, no, maybe you'll have the last question. I will give you the floor, please.
My name is Matthew Newton. I'm from Generali. So I, being in an Italian business, share concerns both about structural reform and youth unemployment. Your suggestion raises lots of questions in my mind, but first of all, I just want to applaud the ambition of it, because you know, I think it's fantastic coming from Poland that you express something that hopefully will have an impact. So I'd like to just make a suggestion rather than ask a question, if I may, because of the number of questions that certainly raises in my own mind in the conversation we've had at our table. What about, as part of that investment, actually making an investment to encourage some of those structural reforms that you'd like to encourage by this fund. So, for example, addressing, the very deep and serious problem about youth unemployment by encouraging modes of youth training, apprenticeships, investing in those very projects that actually are starved of financing in this straitened times. Would that be a possible, let's say, element of what you would be suggesting? Thank you.
I must say I would love the portfolio to expand into that direction. My worry is that to get a majority accepting that of a European instrument, in a sense, intruding upon a policy typically reserved for the national nation state, might be difficult. But I mean, clearly, it's just as important as energy or broadband links or whatever. I mean, it is more important than that. It is just that it might be a bit more difficult to get everyone on board with this idea. I myself love it. I think it would be even better to address some of the weaknesses and also to address the labor demand shortages and skill shortages directly, but it's just more controversial.
Thank you. Before giving the floor to Guntram, let me only mention en passant that one very important argument that you might have is that the US is posting a current account deficit. Japan is now posting a slight current account deficit, if I'm not misled. The UK is posting a current account deficit. The euro area is posting a very large current account surplus. So we are in a unique position inside the advanced economy to do something. We are excess of savings at a moment where obviously we should have some kind of mobilization of these savings for investing in Europe, in the euro area, in Europe in general, and in the euro area in particular. You have the floor, Guntram.
Yeah, I also would like to thank you for the speech and the ambition also that you exhibit in the speech. And basically, I have one question, which is perhaps putting the question on the other side of the investment. You have emphasized very much the need to do public investment and to get the funding right, get European funding, deficit funding for the investment. But perhaps what is really missing is an agreement on what we want to actually do together. I mean, what is the kind of projects we really want to do together? You mentioned defense. Perhaps consensus will emerge on defense spending. I mean, you mentioned it, and it's quite obvious why you mentioned it in particular. That may be one area, but there's certainly other areas. And I was wondering how you would think we could shape the debate on what are the things we want to do together, because that's, at the end of the day, we have to agree on common goals, and then we will find the financial means to do those goals.
And we coming back to the original question, and it proves that it is important. I did mention defense, and as you might have noticed, it was not in the original speech, and for good reason. That's who knows. That might be something that will, as Europe, we will need more investment in, and it's certainly a common goal. And this is something that there are strong externalities and common interests in that spending. Hopefully, it's not needed. But again, I mean, I just fully agree with that. That it is. I mean, I did mention few areas, but it's far from complete. This is something that needs to be done. But once again, it's more difficult when the economy is so depressed, when the interest rates are zero, to get things wrong. Because even if you do get things wrong on the investment side, if it's not by itself productivity enhancing, at least you save some people from staying as long-term unemployed, and you save well, labor productivity from declining, and labor force from disappearing, and that's even a greater sin in the current environment.
Thank you very, very much indeed for your response, which were very candid, direct, and I think you are very close to something which is absolutely necessary in Europe at the present moment. By the way, you're only expanding, if I can mention, the commitment of the new president of the Commission. So you say not 300 billion, but more than twice more of that, and yeah, 7. So it's something which is certainly very, very bold, but also astute, because you have a lot of remarks, including, of course, that you want to mobilize the private money to do all that. So we thank you very, very much indeed. I think it was a very, very useful working dinner. We still have a dessert, and you deserve a dessert, I would say. Thank you very much.
From the Côte d'Ivoire, I mean, just keep her. Don't discourage her.
They're Australian. under supervision of... very rigorous. He will have to prove that he's more rigorous than... Well, that's the word. So how will it look like? So there will be here overseeing ECHO and above him seems... I've talked with my former head of cabinet who is now working for Qatar, and it seems that they're still practically figuring out how it will work in practice, because the vice presidents, in order to do their job, they would have to have some real instruments. And for the moment, it's not very clear how that's going to provide it. Previously, when we talked about the cluster model in the Commission, the assumption was always that the vice president would also carry a portfolio in that field. Like I did economic and monetary affairs, same in energy, covering climate and others. Now, the vice president would be without portfolio. And if you don't have a portfolio, your leverage is much weaker. I find it very difficult to understand how it can work. Yes. You're actually stronger because so yes, the vice president will not turning a blind eye on France. Conflict of interest. Wow. Sometimes these coordination tasks turn to representational tasks. That's possible. Recently, during the recent debate, they questioned one of the European Parliament how the inflation constitutes extraordinary circumstances. I think it is a fair question. It's a fair question. That's why, in fact, we want to advance this kind of initiative in investment. I think it's worth really putting your people to read the treaty with a very thick comb, so that look for clauses of exceptional circumstances, see whether this kind of, say, joint European investment, capital injection into a European fund investment could be considered, like in ESM, could be liberated from lots of tax. Because, as you know, ESM contributions to the capital injections of ESM, they are calculated in the Eurostat because that's in the law, basically. But the Commission, when we did it, considered it so they don't count. Anyway, you could basically have the same object, but then what is the difference between that and the ERB make the people in the country think that we are pretty good. It's kind of dangerous. The situation in a nutshell is that there's a triple problem in a way. One is that digital change has been particularly harsh. Nokia when it was, well, I mean there's still something left, but Finland lost like 4 points of GDP.
Even you.
I'm not a future man. I'm looking to the future. And
I was one of the last users of Nokia.
I was actually until spring, but two of my Nokias, they got stuck. So that's the parliament standard.
I still do have the Nokia 808, the super camera phone. Which I love. It's boutique thing. I mean, it's not for everyone.
No,
I love that phone. I must say, I took what the flight of Nokia personally. It was always very big in Poland. I used to hack Nokias and repair them electronically, even in my spare time. And what Microsoft, the deal and the coalition, before that, I never liked it. So it is quite sad.
Exactly, yeah, that was very personal for me because I mean, I was the US cabinet here at the Prime Minister's Finland during the previous economic crisis in the early 1990s. And that was the time when Nokia was about to go bust. They started the recovery. We became friends with Johan Olela at the time. I spent often weekends in his office, the Nokia headquarters, talking about the taxation, talking about other things. Kind of also feeling that we made it together. We recovered, did well for 15 to 20 years. But now it's been the price of labor is overpriced in terms of cost coverage. Then the public sector is struggling to get the kids with this year, last year, Finland passed the 60% market debt. And the government is doing something, but it's not yet stabilizing. So, okay, I come from the opposition part, but still they messed it up. We have elections next spring, next April, and I think my party will be back to government. Again, cleaning